Good morning, grade 6s. Welcome back to our second video for our ancient Greece history unit. Today we'll start with a bell ringer, so I would like for you to take the time right now to pause the video and to answer the bottom two things that I asked for you to do, or to complete them. Reviewing the Greeks, we will have done that in class before you start this. So, on your piece of paper, name as many of the gods as you can and what they are the gods of. This is a review from our last class, and then in preparation for today, describe a democracy. I know you guys learned about this last year with Miss Megan, but in your own words, begin to describe for me a democracy. Pause the video, hit play when you have finished. All right, a democracy. This is an important thing we need to learn about when studying ancient Greece, is because democracies were started and formed by, oh, my thing's in the wrong corner. It was basically developed and implemented and first used by the Greeks. And so in order to learn about the Greeks, to know them fully, we need to understand what a democracy, how it came to be. And so a democracy is a government run by the people who live under it. So for most of human history before this, the type of government was like a king or somebody who was one person in charge, maybe has a few friends around them, and they run the country. They make the decisions, they make the laws, and sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. Sometimes they exploit their power, sometimes they give good laws and rights to their people. But a government, a democracy, is a government, a governing body, a group of people making decisions that are by the people. So it's run by the people who live under it for the people. So the purpose is for the people who are in the Greek city-state or whatever it is. Where do we see situations like this now? Where do we see democracies? There are a lot of democratic republics in the world. Indonesia is one of those, and the democratic part of it comes from the word democracy, and it's basically a republic that's voted on by the people. And so we will learn about a republic when we learn and study the ancient Roman civilization and their formation of the republic. But a republic is basically separation of powers, where there's a leader, somebody who's the head of the Senate or the president, like in Indonesia. There's the Senate that is instituted to keep true to the Constitution, not be forced by the popular opinion. And then there's the House of Representatives. That's what you guys have here. And in the U.S. they have this. Canada, where I'm from, it's a little bit different. But it is based off of the people's choice. They elect people to represent them. I vote for someone who will represent me in the House, and they make laws and they give them to the Senate, and then it's passed. And so we see this in lots of different places. There's lots of different democracies or democratic states in the world right now. Most are obviously the ones that aren't are like North Korea, China, Middle Eastern countries, some African colonies in Central and South America. You can do a quick Google search and find out which ones are. However, democracy started in ancient Greece. Democracy is good. If you're a person who likes to be free, who likes to be able to have a say in society, who likes to have your voice heard, most countries give you freedom of speech. I know there's lots of attacks on that right now, but that's where it starts from. So other terms that we need to know are the other types of government. And so we see basically a development of government through history, and the ancient Greeks give us a really good picture of it because they had it all. Okay, and then eventually the republic came through the Romans. But here are some terms. You need to write these in your notes, and you need to know these because I have a feeling these will be on the quiz you guys take tomorrow. So a tyrant is a one-man ruler, a single leader like a king, dictator, emperor, or chief. Now, when I use the term tyrant, I'm referring to the word tyrant as it was used and known in ancient Rome or ancient Greece, because during this time, the tyrant one-man leader was a term for a one-man leader, okay, like a king or whatever. However, now it has more of an evil meaning, right? We think of Kim Jong-un in North Korea as being a tyrant, a corrupted one-man ruler. And so that is tyrant. You will need to know that. An oligarchy is the formation of nobles, or it's a group of people who are running the country. So people ruled by the few. So there's a few people in charge of all the people. Instead of it being one-man ruler, one person in charge of all the people, now it's a few people in charge of people. And we're going to look at how that happened in ancient Greece. But the oligarchy, the nobles, the people who were mostly the rich and influential, formed a small body, and they ruled the people. And so they're ruled by the few, wrote laws. Democracy, right? It's a government of the people, ruled by the people, ruling the people. People rule the people. If you don't like it, you vote them out. Nobles, if you want to vote nobles, nobles were wealthy landowners with a lot of influence. And so as the Bronze Age and urbanization happened in ancient Greece, the nobles the rich people could buy the land, and now they owned the means of farming, the means of food, and when people need food and they're hungry, they're willing to give you more. And so the nobles were the very wealthy of the wealthy. They controlled the land, and so when it became time to form oligarchies, they were the most influential, and of course were placed in that position. How it came to be. So democracy started in the city-states. So remember last time there was these cities, or these polises that grew. They had Uncle Willie as king. And so they developed into city-states. Big cities, sufficient in food, and would only really be dependent on other states as there was need for war or disaster, those kinds of things. And so in these city-states, before democracy came, they were ruled by kings and chiefs, and they some of them were destroyed through wars or battles, and then had to continue living. But as they ruled, they began to lose power because of these nobles. These nobles had a lot of money, wealth, and influence, and so oftentimes the kings would be killed off by the nobles, and then the nobles will form an oligarchy. So most ancient Greek states or city-states back then had either a king, like a chief, one person in charge, a tyrant leader, or they had an oligarchy. The oligarchy formed out of these king chief states as the nobles gained power, as they were developing colonies, as things began to prosper. And so under these oligarchies, they weren't as focused on their own pocket or their own gain or establishing their own legacy, as kings would be committed to allowing their children to be the next ones in line. These oligarchies were ruling together, more decisions made on behalf. They didn't seem as corruptible, but later on you'll find that they were. And so under these people, they wrote laws that would be posted in city spaces, where when people came to the city, they would see these are the laws of the town. Everybody would be aware of what the laws were, what their rights were. And so under this, people began to prosper for a while. There was stability, markets. The thing is, like, as there's stability in power and strength, there is prosperity, as people feel the freedom to work, to live, and hopefully no natural disasters happen. But there's the Dark Ages in Greek history, and of course there's always a golden age too, hopefully. And so as the kings were living, times became tough. There were natural disasters. They live in the Ring of Fire, so there's volcanoes, wars going on. The Trojan War, remember that 10-year war, where basically the men are gone for 10 years fighting a war in another place. What happens when the men are gone? The fields don't get worked as well, right? Prosperity decreases. All the resources are going to feed them. No babies are being born, right? It just cripples countries, and they were all banded together to go fight Troy, and then came back to a decimated lifestyle. And so what they did in order to, first of all, feed the people, to basically allow for more people to have wealth, or maybe not wealth, but to be able to live and have a living, a skill. They developed those colonies, and we talked about colonies in the last video, but colonies started to expand. They needed places to get more food, so they put people on boats, dropped them off on new shores. Those new shores, they would take their culture, they would take their traditions, their religion, their laws, their government, and they would be a second city to the city-state that they came from. And so these colonies would send supplies, would send slaves, would send food, would send materials that the mother city would need. And so through this, ideas began to spread. The colonies would interact with each other. Some would hear like, oh, you have a bad king, we have a bad king. Or oligarchy, what's something we can do? So the idea of a democracy began to spread, just kind of like COVID, slowly from one person to the next, and then all of a sudden it's an explosion. Maybe I shouldn't compare it to COVID, that's not very nice. But what happened is these new colonies had to follow all the Greek and the Phoenicians' religions and political policies. So these laws began to spread as well, right? The rights of people, the religions, these cities and temples would be built similarly to the ones where they came from. So a lot of the architecture and things like that, economic policies were the same. Oh man, I have a meeting really soon, so I'm going to try to finish this up. Okay, and as this happened, the people who were in charge began to be challenged. So these colonies were wondering, why do we have to send people, all our stuff to these cities? And so as these cities grew bigger, they began to fight with other people. They began to raise armies. And as you fight, you have to give your soldiers something to fight with. So these armies began to have weapons. And these weapons enabled them to have influence over the people they were fighting for. They say, oh, we won't fight, or we'll chop off your head, right? Mutiny. And so we learned, remember, in the past, that hungry people rebel. And so as time goes on, as times get worse, or as they're in battle or they're besieged, the people get sick and tired of these tyrants or these nobles who are ruling over them. And so what do? They rebel, and the infantry demand better living conditions, or they rebel. And so some places, like in ancient Rome, they began to offer their soldiers land upon a successful, like, if you serve in my army, I will give you land, those kinds of things. And so demand better living conditions, or they rebel. And so slowly they get more persuasion. Democracy begins to form. So as power was challenged, another important factor for the power of the nobles being challenged is that up until this point, if you had land, you were wealthy. If you had animals, you could trade them, a chicken for somebody's house, right? Something like that. You needed land in order to be wealthy. However, that changed when coins became a thing. And I'll send you a picture of some of the coins. But as coinage came, your wealth wasn't measured in how much dirt you had, right, to walk on that you could say was your own, but it was in how many coins were in your pocket. So it didn't matter if you had land. And now the most powerful people at the time who owned lots of land, they didn't necessarily mean they were the wealthiest, and people could make a living off of making pots or blacksmiths or plumbers, and they could move up and down the social ladder without having food, and so gaining influence, kind of like the business class of today, but gaining influence over society without having land. And that challenged the authority. And these new wealthy people in the country knew that the oligarchy, the nobles who ruled the country, were rich, but they were rich too, so why couldn't they have a voice? And so began the revolutions of the time. That is a great place for us to end today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in class. Hope you study well and get ready for your quiz.